Well, once again, good afternoon this Sunday to all of those in the greater Medford area, in Jacksonville, in Shady Cove, those we minister to in the Ashland area, and now more recently I need to add Grants Pass as I was preaching there this weekend. So really all of those who follow us in Southern Oregon, my name is Father Ken Sampson, and I want to add a follow-up video today again on the theme of discipleship. I've been sharing with folks. I started reading this book by Sherry Weddell called Intentional Discipleship, and it was very jaw-dropping and kind of jarring to the heart to read, especially in the opening chapter, the disturbing statistics of how people have fallen away from the faith in the modern era, and clearly how we have approached ministry and formation, at least in my lifetime, that it has not borne good fruit. We're learning now in the aftermath that, first of all, and as she points this out in the book, that catechesis does not equal discipleship. The head knowledge that we give when we put people through Sunday school or send them to Catholic school or do sacramental preparation. The assumption in the past has always been, when our culture was more rooted in Judeo-Christian values, that the culture, I guess, would take care of the evangelization portion of our journey, and that we could jump right in with intellectual formation, and we would end up with disciples as an end product. What Sherry points out, though, is that disciples are formed not first and foremost by intellectual formation. They're formed by a love story. It has to begin with falling in love. Then when we have that, if our heart has been given over to the Lord and we've experienced his love, and we can talk about having a personal relationship with Jesus and really understand what that phrase means, then the intellectual formation does strengthen us further. But if all we learn is the intellectual part of it, we are merely scholars at the end. We're not truly disciples. And that's been very critical, because we see as Christianity's become more inconvenient, and we have seen more and more subtle persecutions creep into our culture, people drift away. That intellectual understanding is not enough to sustain people when times get tougher. So what is a disciple in the end? There are a lot of ways to define it, but what I think of is a person who is all in, who's fully committed to their Christian faith, who for them, their faith is not simply a thing, but it is the thing. It's the North Star. It's the compass that guides them. It may lead them to the person that they will marry. It will inform how they raise their children. It will affect how they see the world. And the solution, I think, will repair the flaws in our culture. It may impact the career you pursue. It certainly would impact your sense of a call to a vocation. It affects literally everything. And even if we're not fully formed intellectually, if we've at least had that love story, the first moment we encounter the cross, rather than having it drive us away, we can say, as St. Peter did in John chapter 6, where else are we to go? You have the words of everlasting life. I'm sticking with you. That's really our hope. So we as a church have grown in wisdom, in understanding our errors. I think what has informed us in the misunderstanding, though, too, is that ministry is a very difficult field to develop some kind of metric measuring success. If I want to know as a pastor, as a preacher, as a minister, how I'm doing, how is that measurable? If the goal is discipleship, that's a very mysterious thing. That's the interior spiritual life of a person, and it's hard to quantify. So unfortunately, what has happened as a common error is that the church and individual ministers have simply reached for the lowest hanging fruit, quantifiable data, and assume that that's an accurate measure. For instance, how do I know if I'm creating disciples? The temptation is just to take a head count, to take attendance. Or a measure of stewardship. How is the parish bank account doing? Well, it traces all the way back even to seminary. As a seminarian, as one being formed in ministry, how am I doing? Is it my grade point average? Is that what it is? No, we know that is a lie now. We know that's false. But it remains kind of mysterious how to measure it. What we need to strive for is that goal of leading people to a setting in which it's more likely or easier for them to fall in love. And there actually turns out to be a process. It's why I've given this the title, Discipleship, How Do I Get There? So according to Sherry Waddell, who interviewed thousands of people who are in that category of discipleship, she asked them to share their spiritual journey through various studies. And what emerged over time, her and her group discovered, was a consistent pattern of events that unfold. And so briefly, there are 5 steps involved. The first one is something she calls trust. I might rename it Christian friendship. But the idea is that our invitation to follow Christ first begins in the context of a relationship with somebody else, generally always. If you've been a Christian your entire life, likely that trusting relationship, that Christian friendship, would be your parents, whom you trust and assume they desire good for you. One of the things that they provided for you for your wellness is their faith. More and more today, though, people are growing up in homes that do not live out the faith. Then perhaps it's a coach, it's a teacher, it's a role model who you just notice when everybody else is freaking out, this person is calm, and when everyone else is depressed, this person seems to have joy, and when everyone else is cowardly and silent, this person seems to find a deep courage. And or you've been told by them that part of the source of that strength is their faith. That is a gateway. Today I've kind of been giving it the context of the disciples themselves. So if it helps people remember it better, just think of the beginning of the Gospels in the account of Andrew and John. I'm going to say John. It's actually an unnamed disciple, but most scholars assume it's John. So if you'll just allow me, I'll say Andrew and John. How did they first start following Christ? Well, they're followers of John the Baptist, and they have a trusting relationship with him. And probably before knowing him, some other friend referred them to John the Baptist and said, you really got to see this character who preaches out in the wilderness. He's really something. Come and see, check it out. But they've developed a trust in John the Baptist. And then one faithful day, Jesus shows up on the scene, and John the Baptist points him out in the crowd and said, behold, the Lamb of God. And because they trust him, they depart from John the Baptist and begin to seek out this Jesus. And just a few days later, that cycle repeats itself with Peter. Andrew comes to Peter and says, the one we've been looking for, we found him. You got to check it out. He really speaks like no one else you've ever heard of before. He's extraordinary. You need to come and see. And he receives that information through the lens of a lifelong relationship with Andrew as his brother. He trusts his brother, even to the point where he allows Jesus to step in his boat one day and use it as a platform for preaching. That is a critical piece. Now, if you've already journeyed past that in your life, it's something not to take lightly, because as I've shared with people, throughout my 20s, sadly for me, I moved far away from God. And when he struck me in the heart one day, I tried to journey back home, but I came to a recognition at one point that I did not know a single person of faith that I was willing to call a friend at that point in my life, in my late 20s. Some people literally don't have anybody in their life who's close to them who is also living the faith in a dynamic way. So how important is it for you and I to be that friend to someone else, to kind of have our eyes open on the lookout for someone who appears to be in need, or who's having a bad day, or who appears to be hungry? That's step one for ourselves, to be a friend for others and Think back on the friends who led us on our journey. But it begins with trust. What follows after that is a second phase that she refers to as curiosity. What did that look like for the disciples? Well, for Andrew and John, they actually start following Jesus in a physical way long before they follow him in a spiritual way. I was jokingly calling them stalkers because they are sort of trailing him as he makes his way home. And I can just imagine him stopping in the street at some point and looking back and asking, "Can I help you with something? You appear to be following me home." And we're told their response is, "Rabbi, where do you live?" And he says, "Come and see." It's the start of this curiosity. What they're expressing, I think, is, "We'd like to buy you lunch. We'd like to have a conversation with you. We'd like to hear more. You are an intriguing person. Tell us where you're from. Tell us where you get this wisdom." That launches them to that next phase. What does it look like in our lived experience? Well, it could be, again, if you went back to a great role model, curiosity might be, if you are extraordinary in some virtue and I'm observing you, I might be inspired, if I know you're a person of faith, to ask you, how is it that your faith has given you that strength? Where does that come from? How do you get it? I want it for my life. Or, for instance, a common source still is dating someone who's a person of faith. You love them and you see something attractive in them and their characteristics, their virtue, and you may be inspired to ask how much of their personality, their character was formed through their faith. A common one that we get here in Medford is in a place where Christianity is far less common, is a grandparent or a parent passes away and the children or grandchildren are cleaning out the house or the garage and they come across some religious items and they don't know much about them or what they mean, but they know enough to know it feels wrong to throw them in the trash. So often people will show up at our parish office and ask, "What are these things? Maybe you could use them. They seem like they're Catholic." And sometimes they'll ask a question, "What is this?" "Well, that's called a rosary. This is how you use it." Or, "That's an icon," or, "This is a whatever." And it's a start of kind of a series of inquiries. That is a needed piece. We have to have this curiosity within ourselves to start asking questions. So once we've had an impact in our life from some person of faith and we start that inquiry, then comes the third phase, which is still in a passive mode. You're not still actually doing anything actively, but Sherry Waddell labels this third phase openness to change. For the apostles, what this looked like, I think of Peter. I have an icon in my office of Peter hanging up his fishing nets. It's meant to be an icon on vocation, a vocational call. But his face in that moment, the iconographer was able to capture a little bit of his sadness and deep thought. He's literally getting to the point where he's asking the question, can I leave my family business? My family for generations are fishermen. It's all I've known from my childhood. Am I willing to depart from fishing even for a season, that routine of my life, to pursue this invitation to ministry? And would I ever be willing to leave fishing permanently? That openness is needed before God can come in, because he never will force himself on us. It has to be a free invitation of our heart that lets him in. So we have to first achieve that. We have to leave the door open a crack. Or you can think of Matthew. This is one I would think of in this case. We would presume that Matthew, as a tax collector, lived a very comfortable life. He was probably among the wealthiest of people in Capernaum. He was a friend to the Romans. I'm sure despised by the Jews, but living a very comfortable life. He could have easily just drifted through life with that level of ease. But he had to ask himself, am I willing to leave all of this high salary, this guaranteed income, and go out on the road where I will sleep among the stars and perhaps be homeless and might not know where my next meal is coming from and might experience physical hardships and difficulties that many of the poorest of the poor feel? Would I be willing to do that to explore these questions? Each of us also have to reach a point at which, we say, if it helped this person that I respect a lot and change their life, and even if there's some cost associated with taking that up, would I be willing to take a risk and give it a try? That's stage 3. Then for us, stage 4 starts the first active mode. When we actually engage energetically, we start going into hunting mode, and we start demanding answers and seeking out spiritual directors and reading books and informing ourselves. Even though we call the disciples, the 12 disciples, at the point of the story we hear in today's gospel in Luke, they're really not to that discipleship phase yet. What we hear them ask is a classic spiritual seeking question. Lord, teach us how to pray. We want to learn how to pray like you. Every time we see you go off in the wilderness and you come back stronger, you come back at peace. We sometimes overhear you praying, talking to the Father as though you had this intimate, awesome connection, and we don't have that. Or you have this amazing focus, and my brain is scattered. I have monkey brain. My thoughts are all over the place. I can't string 2 sentences together, but you seem to do it with ease. I want to learn to pray like you pray. Give me some specifics. Give me some tips. That's now a spiritual seeker who's asking that kind of question. And ultimately, the last phase will be discipleship itself, which for the 12 doesn't fully take place until Pentecost. They move in a heartbeat from cowering in an upper room to be willing to lay their life down for their faith. And I think ultimately, if you understand that context begins with the love story and ends with that kind of a powerful thing, to me, the image it conjures up is a marital one, to say, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, I'm in this to the end, whatever may come, no matter how hard it will be. If I'm truly in love, there is no limit to what I'm willing to suffer or do for that person. That's what we need more of in this world. I shared last week in our video that sadly, most pastors estimate that there are only about 5% of people in their congregations who have reached this last level of discipleship. If you're not there, don't be fully discouraged. It doesn't make you a bad person. A lot of people simply don't know how to get there. A lot of people may not even be aware that there are those upper levels to reach for. I know a lot of good people that I certainly consider Christian who have shared with me that they've never had a personal encounter with Christ. They would love to know what that would be like, but it's just not been something they experienced. So there are a lot of people scattered along the way, but I think the first thing that we could take under advisement, if we're wise, is understand how that process works, to move from friendship with somebody who's closer to Christ than we are, who we look to as a role model or someone we look up to curiosity, where we start asking more questions, to a sense of openness, to eventually aggressively looking for God, and finally arriving. But here's just something I just want to add, which I consider most hopeful in that process, which certainly can take a lifetime. And that is, because we're made in the image and likeness of God, and because our God is the greatest of teachers who would never ask us to do something that he himself doesn't do, I think there's some benefit in reminding ourselves that God also carries out those same activities. The specifically 3 words that struck me in our gospel that Jesus gives them back as an answer. He said, ask and you shall receive. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open. Ask, seek, find. That's spiritual seeking right there. But at the same time, he's inviting us to do that. God himself is asking and seeking and knocking. He asks us to come and follow him. It's a constant invitation for those who are at the beginning of the journey. And if we say yes to that, then he moves to inviting us to consider a more challenging vocation, a pathway that will bring greater challenges to our life, which might include the mystery of the cross, but for the sake of the kingdom, for the sake of building up of the kingdom. In my case, a call to the priesthood, I discovered. Would I be willing to make that additional sacrifice? And if you say yes to something like that, something bigger, which is a core part of your purpose in life, it doesn't stop there. Then it becomes a daily asking. Would you be willing to set your agenda aside today, your bullet points of things you think are important and need done, in favor of being aware of the interruptions and the curveballs that I am going to send you? Would you be willing to set your plan aside for the people I will send your way today so that you can minister to them, that you can be mindful of their needs and watch for that? That's discipleship in action. That is the full force of the church being unleashed. So he's always asking us to grow further and further. He's always seeking us. I think of the classic poem, The Hounds of Heaven. The hounds of heaven are after us. It's a relentless love of God, regardless of what we do or where we go. God is chasing us down with his love. He's always looking for us and seeking out our hearts when we temporarily forget him, when we make scenic detours. It's like the Song of Songs in Scripture. And last of all, he's always knocking. He's always tapping on our heart, asking us to grow in our love for him and for our neighbor. And if we get to discipleship, we're invited to take that same approach with other people. When we look for them. We look for the lost sheep. We look for the one who is struggling, who's hungry, who's in greatest need. We invite them. We say, have you ever been a part of a Bible study? Would you like to come to mine? Would you like to come to our Sunday reception this week, or a parish picnic? Or have you ever considered joining this group or that group? We'd love to have you as a volunteer, or just come check it out. Come and see. And if they're not up to it in that moment, be persistent. Ask them again in a few weeks. Come back to them, always in that spirit of friendship. That is what the church is called to be. That more dynamic image of our Christian faith is what we're called to live. Think for a moment what that would look like. We think somewhere these days between 20 and 25% of the population of planet Earth is Christian if we take the entire Christian family together. 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 people. If all of us were living as disciples, as we should, as God desires us to, that is certainly enough people to transform the entire world. What is holding the church back as an agent of change? What is holding us back individually is taking that leap, making that full commitment. And it begins again with falling in love. The movement of the heart first. The other things fill in. Let's help each other find that love affair with God by being a friend to people in need. Let's seek it out ourselves as best we can, aggressively hunting for it. And God will take care of the rest. I hope you'll consider those words. I hope that lights a fire in your heart to stretch a little further, to see what a dynamic faith looks like. It's full of joy. It's full of excitement. And if you ever reach it, you discover a beautiful surprise. The joy cannot be contained. It can't be hidden. The enthusiasm is natural. The evangelization that occurs is effortless. It doesn't require training. Everything just flows naturally from that. And it becomes a labor of love. God bless you all, and tune in next week for some more thoughts.